outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to a special election manifesto edition of the Weekly Review. Today we're joined by some Weekly Review regular faces and some potential political candidates from various parts of the political system. With us today, we've got Joe Emmett from the Labour Party, Rob Hurd from the Liberal Democrats, Brent Poland from the Green Party, Ralph Lucas from the Conservative Party. And they're all here today to help us assemble the perfect Teachers Talk Radio Education Manifesto. A recent poll this week has suggested that 93% of teachers in the UK think that education hasn't played the vital role that we might expect it to play in a general election. So today we're here to put that right. Our guests are going to be suggesting what they think the next government should be doing on education. Our regular Teachers Talk Radio guests are going to be talking about what they would like to see parties putting into their education manifesto. And we'd like to hear from you too. What are your suggestions of the great policies that the parties have yet to take up? Today's show is going to fall into 4 parts with 4 specific topics for us to look at in the field of education policy. The first session will be on primary school and early years education. The second session will be on secondary and FE. The third will be on universities. And the fourth will be on teacher, professional development, training and recruitment. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our chair for this first session, which is Hannah Wilson. Over to you, Hannah.
Good morning, everyone. And before we get going, just a quick shout out to our lovely sponsors that make these shows possible. So we've got John Catt Educational, Teaching How-Tos, Reading Solutions, Apps for Good, and Easy for You. So thank you to those, and you'll hear a bit more about them throughout the show. So our first section is policies for early years and primary education. So what would you like to see, Chris, defer in terms of where you want this to go, and what do you think about kind of what's currently out there for where it needs to be?
Well, for me, there's only one policy I would like to see enacted for primary schools and early years, and that's an extension of the free school meals programme to include everybody in the whole of the education system. I mean, my policy would be for the government to fund free school meals for everyone in full-time education from nursery to the final year of FE. Currently, the free school meals policy is promoted as a tool of the welfare system that can save low and no income families money, but it should really be regarded, I think, as an instrument of the health system, because training children and young people to choose and eat a nutritious, healthy meal each day will surely have positive future effects on the health of the nation. Only last week we talked about dietary related cancers, obesity rates and tooth decay being on the rise. All of these to me are clear signs that we are rapidly becoming what we eat, and what we eat probably isn't good enough for us. The government already spends £1 billion a year on free school meals. Would raising that to £2.5 billion to cover everyone really bankrupt the nation? Of course it wouldn't. Government can always find money for the causes it values. And this policy apparently even generates money. Estimates from the Institute of Public Health in 2024 have calculated that between £1.38 and £1.71 would be generated for every £1 spent on the policy. So from my point of view, it's a no-brainer for me. Slash admin, boost healthcare, and make the school dinner hall a happy, healthy social space.
Brent, what do you think is the most important thing in terms of the primary curriculum and wanting to improve primary education?
Completely agree with Christopher. Those, as one of my colleagues stood up, Frank Stringer, was told recently, he stood up and says, feeding kids. Wow, dangerous that, isn't it? Wow, we don't want to feed our hungry children. So yeah, we don't mean test, for instance, pensioners when it comes to a pension, but why are we talking about not feeding hungry children? And it does claw back a lot of social gains, but also educational gains as well. Healthy children, happier children are going to grow up and not need the NHS as much. They're also going to be better educated in class. That's going to help close the social gap. But the primary school curriculum is far too narrow. Far too narrow. Where's the fun in education these days when it's all league tables and it's all serious high-stake testing? My 8-year-old daughter nearly lost learning because of SATs. And I was this close myself to taking my daughter out of school because of high-stakes testing. It is ruining a generation of children's love of learning. It's not for the children. It's not even for the school. It's all the super masters like Gillian Keegan who can score points and say, the education standards have increased by X amount. That is ridiculous. God, I did sound like John Gibbs there, didn't I? But that's the problem. Our education, what is the purpose of it? To enrich children, to grow children, to nurture children, to make children happier, to make children wanted to be at school. Rates are declining. We would have smaller class sizes, a more freer curriculum, more arts, more music, more sport, more healthier children, more happier children, more productive children, children who would see school as something they value, as opposed to school as something they have to do. So the primary curriculum is so important because you get it right at early years, it follows all the way through. We have to start by not making children data, product, and somehow turning them into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because when children start to fail in education, we pick that up at secondary school and we can see the outcome of already the self-fulfilling prophecy of some children written off. And that self-fulfilling prophecy is making the gaps a lot bigger in social mobility. And that is where we would start at the Greens as well. We want an education system that models itself on other successful countries, the Scandinavian countries as well. So that's where I would start with education. Start with the fact that what is the purpose of education? We want our children to learn for the sake of learning, to love learning, to want to go to school, to be fed at school, to be looked after at school, to be able to see their teacher at school, a specialist teacher. So we would increase our pay to make sure that teachers are retained. We would also have more than 6,500 teachers are going to be needed, let me tell you that. But let's go the other way. Let's keep the teachers we have and retain them. So we would invest also in school buildings to make sure those school buildings are fit for purpose. No point having a child to take the Maslow hierarchy of needs. I've gone to Swaziland 2 years ago and helped build a school block with my own children. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe we're going to have countries coming over here and helping build our schools. We're going the other way. So no, we need our children to be going to a school, and school has to have the correct facilities for those children as well. It needs properly funded, it needs properly organised, and it needs a curriculum which is fair and also going to help those children in the future. Thank you.
Ralph, I know that the Conservatives have said about 2 hours mandatory PE for pupils. What else do the Conservatives think that will benefit the primary students?
Well, so far as I can judge from the manifesto, and I'm by no means in the middle of creating it, the message is early years is supremely important. We think we're getting it right. And I would say from a parent's point of view, and a lot of my life is spent involved with Good Schools Guide, that the state of English primary schools is now excellent. They have really shown that they are good places to send your children to. And the proportion of primary schools which are doing well is really encouraging, and this goes back to through the Blair government and this government. So it's been a long progress. So I would like to see continued improvement rather than any radical change. I would like to see more experimentation, more looking at ways of doing things better. I would like to radically reform the Key Stage 2 tests, which I think have become perverted into a measure of school performance rather than something which is intended to help the pupils. I think we can redo that substantially. But beyond that, I think let's continue building on the current excellent state of that part of the education system.
Thank you. One thing that I found interesting from the Liberal Democrats talking about the mental health professionals in primary schools. How do you think that will look, and how will it benefit the students?
Well, thanks very much for that, Hannah. And I think that comes off the back of a point that that Ralph's just made. Talks about kind of excellent schools in the UK at the moment, but we've got the highest rate of persistent absence that we've ever had, and we've got the highest kind of recruitment and retention crisis that we've had in English schools for a long time. So I'm afraid I would disagree. I think the people that are working in schools at the moment are working flat out to make them function, and working very, very hard, and that's what makes them excellent. But I'm afraid actually I don't think the system is excellent. And when we're talking about kind of creating that excellence, we've got stress around tests, of course, and having a qualified mental health professional in school, in every primary school, every secondary school, is a first point of contact for those stresses that are happening on a day-to-day basis. We all know that CAMHS waiting lists at the moment are ridiculously high, and unfortunately that is filtering down to children. I'm a governor of a local primary school, and that's filtering down to children who are in year one, who are on CAMHS waiting lists. They're 18 months at the moment, and by being able to relieve some of the stress in the system by having a mental health professional in every single primary and secondary school, it means that we can kind of take the pressure off systems elsewhere and provide more wraparound care so that our children are happier and enjoying the curriculum that they want to see in schools.
Thank you. And Joe, I've got skin in the game. So my son is he's deaf and has a speech delay, and he's an SRB and gone through the whole EHCP process. And I know that your policy talks about more SEND provisions and stuff. How do you see that looking in terms of primary schools? Oh, you just have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Like that probably. Sorry about that. Yes, as a secondary school specialist, again, you know, I'm obviously kind of aware of the primary school needs, because of course those students end up kind of with us. On the SEND front, it's something which I've certainly found on the doorstep. Lots of parents very worried about that and very keen to make sure there's extra provision for that. Again, I think it links into the mental health side of things for young people, making sure there is that kind of support. Again, it will come with a cost element, and I guess I'll mention that now with the VAT on private schools, part of that funding stream through obviously the 6,500 teachers that we like to put into the system as well. So yeah, I mean, on the SEND side of things, again, that is going to take time. I mean, I think Keir's been quite honest about how long the kind of renewal will take to get things back onto its feet. But there's a lot of things that I think we can do quickly, and hopefully a bit of kind of curriculum review, going back to the earlier point. You know, making the kind of curriculum more fun and food, you know, to get the kind of alliteration in there. I mean, both those things are really important if students are hungry, and I see hungry students. I've given out coats in the winter, as I'm sure some of us have as well, to students who are clearly cold because they haven't got ones at home. All those things come down to, I guess, the sort of those COVID years, the cost of living, you know, impacts as well. And I think that comes through, and I think the stresses, again, back for parents about there not being enough specialists or not enough SEND support is purely because they feel that education has been sort of sidelined, I guess, in some ways. It doesn't quite, although I think with Labour's 5 missions, the opportunity element of that has been quite clear, and it's certainly one of my 5 missions that I've pushed for locally, to make sure we have got a new SEND school being built. But again, all schools need to have that. Currently, not all schools do they? They've got real stresses, and that's only increasing.
Paul, I'll come to you. What would you like to see in terms of improving primary education? Is there an area that you would like to see that you think hasn't got enough to it, or put a question to anybody?
Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to the show. Look, I think as a broad and general question, I think early education is vital. If you think of a river, if you want to change the course of a river, it's an awful lot easier to do at source. You put a tiny pebble at the top of Slieve Donard, that will change the course, and the Shimna River will come out down near Warren Point, where Brent lives there or used to live, instead of coming out in Newcastle, where I live. Now, if you try to change the Shimna River in Newcastle, you've got some task on your hand. So look, early intervention, early education, setting the standards, setting the tone for all kinds of education, not just knowledge, but, you know, the whole attitudes, values, skills, principles, and laying super foundations for mental health as well is really outstanding. So I would love to see a huge emphasis on early years and primary schools. And then when children get to areas where I spent most of my life teaching, in post-primary and in university, they will be better positioned, better placed. There will necessarily then be less money needed to be spent in all this compensatory behavior around catch-ups and around mental health and so on.
Thank you. And Adam, what do you think in terms of kind of the primary curriculum? I know that literacy and phonics has been a big kind of push the last few years, and we have gone up the league tables, but how do we make sure that it's not, like we said, the SATs, and it's not all focused towards that? How do we make sure that we get well-rounded pupils? Because we seem to be improving that area, but we've also got kids not coming in and not knowing how to brush their teeth or use the toilet. And how do we kind of balance it out in those early years?
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. I think that one of the issues that I'm hearing here is, again, we're coming back to the school. What about some of those facilities that actually used to be around the school, like the Sure Start centres, and the things that actually used to support the school environment? I am a bit worried about kind of, you know, the toothbrushing, the toilet training, all these things that already overloaded primary school heads have to deal with. You know, sure, would that not be better done outside the school? Or is school now going to be the central place going forward that we basically solve all of society's problems? Because I just feel with the kind of the burnout rates, the retention rates, the recruitment rates, all these things that are going on in schools that we know are issues, you know, if you're adding another job into the primary school early years setting, you know, is that not going to kind of exasperate some of those fundamental issues that we have with teachers? And I don't know if any of the potential candidates want to come on that. You know, do we need to do more around the kind of protective services around schools?
Yeah,
I'll let you answer.
Sorry.
Yeah, answer Adam's, and then we'll go to Paul's question. Go on, Brent.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, you can't do education policy in a vacuum. You can't do it in a vacuum. It has to be part of your social policy. It has to be part of your social care policy, your employment policies. We have a lot of working poor parents who are out there who are working multiple jobs because the distribution of wealth in this country seems to be going top, you know, and not to the bottom. So we need to go back to the society that supports people, services that are there for families when they need them. I go to the point where about you're putting a medical professional that we don't have into a school to sort the children out, which we've helped create with the toxicity of society out there, because we've got this 9-to-5, you know, society now, which is go, go, go. It's too much. And why are people doing all this? Because their bills are out of control, because they have got so much tax to pay. We have a society now which is stressed out, and that stress is feeding to the children. And then what do? We send the children into school, and we're going to have one therapist to sit there and go, tell me what's stressing you out. Well, mummy and daddy are arguing over money stressing you out. What's stressing you out? I'm not good enough, and I'm not fitting this test at 4 and 5 years old. We have created a society of unhealthiness. And we're not going to solve that by putting one therapist in a secondary school or primary school by then trying to fix what we've broken in the first place. So going back to Paul's earlier thing, absolutely right. We need to think about the family. We need to think about the support networks. It takes a community to raise a child. And we've lost.
Rob, I'll let you respond to that one.
We've lost.
Yeah,
we need community.
Thanks very much. Do you know what I think? I think largely broadly, I agree. I think one of the things that is concerning me the most is that we are having kind of almost maybe the first, second generation of parents now who are disengaged with kind of institutions and therefore having problems accessing school. We're not reaching out to parents in a way that means that they're kind of meaningfully engaging with school either, because they might have had issues whilst they were at school and therefore are kind of quite anti-institution themselves. It's quite difficult. I work in in the northwest. In quite, we have kind of our top 20% or in the top 10% of deprivation in the country, and parents just refuse to engage with certain students and refuse to come into school to talk about their kids. We need to kind of address those sorts of things. And going back to Paul's point about kind of trying to change the course of a river, my concern is that we are so far down the line now with our services not being there. They haven't been there for the past kind of 14 years, that anything that we do now is going to have to be a kind of a massive intervention, and therefore I think to a certain extent schools are going to have to take the brunt of that in the initial instance whilst things get set up, and whilst there's a bit more of a long-term strategy to be able to provide those kind of services around society that bolster the kids. I think we are seeing a lot of variance, particularly since COVID, and a big divide in the level of children that are coming into primary school and the levels that they are at in terms of kind of social skills, in terms of kind of reading skills and that sort of stuff. The Lib Dems have set aside a policy really where we'd like to triple the early years pupil premium to £1,000 to kind of to help with that, but also to add in an extra 5 hours of personalised support for younger people who are coming in from disadvantaged backgrounds to kind of bolster that as soon as they come into the primary school, so that course of the river is being tackled at the very start rather than later on.
Can I just jump in there quickly? Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, go for it, and then we'll come to Paul's question.
Only because it was great to hear kind of the mention of kind of sure starts, obviously a Labour policy that is and was very quickly swept aside. And I think we're just seeing the kind of repercussions of that really. And back to the lack of engagement from both sort of children and parents. Again, as mentioned, that is a cost of living impact. It is the stretch. I yesterday spent my Saturday afternoon helping at a Big Eat, which is all about feeding a particularly kind of deprived part of Hereford really, where it's free food, there's donations, and sort of 70-80 people turn up because they know it's a decent place to have some food. As the Trussell Trust always say, they don't want to exist, but the food banks and whatever else there to support families. And you're quite right saying about the impacts on sort of children and families, and we can see it, and the gap has got bigger, and we need to really close that gap. So
I completely agree, and I think I massively used my Sure Start Centre because my child was deaf, and it was having that place to kind of learn sign language for free and be able to use it as much as possible was really helpful, especially when kind of maternity leave pay doesn't kind of go as far as one would like. I'll just come back to Paul's comment because again, I've got skin in the game. He says, please fund support for the major increase in number of children with behaviour needs. Just getting TAs to step in again and again is only ridiculous. Provide special help and fund EHCP budgets fully instead of giving a school 11k for a 12k minimum job. So obviously I've experienced that. My son's been an SRB for 3 years. It's the last year that SRB will have him. So he's now moving to junior school. So he's going from 10 kids to 30 kids to a new class. He's obviously behind because he's had speech therapy instead of some of the other lessons. And he's now going to go to a class 30 where he is a little bit behind, but he can't have a one-to-one TA, even though he's got an EHCP, because the funding for EHCPs hasn't changed since 2013. So how do we support to make sure these kids are getting the support they need in the classroom? Did anyone like to have a crack at that?
Well, I better stick a hand up on that in the silence. I think it really is extremely difficult to know how to do these things. What I would like to see is a real challenge on innovation, encourage people to try different ways of doing it, support them while they're doing that. There are some great charities out there. Beyond Autism is one that I've worked a lot with, who are really making a difference in terms of behaviour in schools and support that kids get in schools. I would just like to see some real innovation because, frankly, neither the Blair government nor any of the Conservative governments have managed to make a success of this. It's a continuing problem and we don't know the answer. And I think the answer to say we'll tackle this with yet another top-down policy can't be right. I think we've got to go for innovation. We've got to find a lot of different ways of asking what works and really support the ones that show promise.
Can I just come in on this? I mean, it's interesting putting all these pieces together. So do we have a more fragmented charity system because the state isn't doing what we need it to do, or is the state not doing what it needs to do because the charity system isn't quite finding the synergy with the education system that we need? Do we really need to start looking at how we direct specific charities to work closer with the education system, or is it something that we can leave to well-meaning individuals outside the sector?
I would say, sorry, just to butt in there. I mean, I would say again, it's it's almost one of Cameron's big kind of society things, isn't it? Charities have stepped in to try and fill that gap. In some ways, been to the left to pick up the pieces. I think you're right when it comes to the kind of connective idea about the umbrella or sort of organisations that are out there and how much they feed into schools. But that is as I'm sure most of us being teachers understand, that's an extra struggle for schools to try and sort of work with, because there are lots of groups out there which do offer pathways, and I'm sure we've all got pastoral support and mental health leads of some sort already, but it's understanding what's out there, and that's difficult for schools to organise. I think that's an extra pressure placed on heads of key stage or whatever it might be to try and find out where to send people to. So once again, a more overview of certain areas would be really, really key in supporting that, I think. And I think that's, again, what's lost, and maybe sure start again is that foundational part of it, back to the Pebble idea, was a factor in allowing that, because people knew where the pathways were. And I think that needs to be strengthened back in again, really.
I also think it's about the way that some of these are kind of introduced and kind of sold in. Going back to the free school meals idea, and there's been a lot of really good research that's been done by Magic Breakfast. Magic Breakfast turned around and said that for every £1 that you invest in feeding children, you end up with £1.62 back of economic benefit. And actually, maybe that is something that the government should be considering, that children aren't that children are investment. We're investing in our country for the future when we're doing things like that. And to leave that investment to charities and to the charity sector seems quite risky to me.
Yeah, can I just point out the elephant in the room? We're the sixth wealthiest country in the world. We shouldn't be relying on charities. The sixth wealthiest. I am literally looking at what I consider Dickensian type of attitudes and Dickensian type of poverty that's happening in the UK. And I don't think it's good enough, not when the distribution of wealth, the distribution of resources. It's interesting seeing the cavalry's coming to rescue the private sector because of the AT. Where's the cavalry been for all those children in the working class areas? That's why the gap's getting bigger. Education, as Rishi Sunak keeps saying, everybody keeps saying, magic bullet to solve a lot of problems. Where is the investment? Kids don't vote, don't they? And that vulnerability is the vulnerability of the poorest people with free school meals who are also SEND. We all know them, we teach them, but they have every disadvantage against them. And nothing is helping them whatsoever. And we all got parents who've had to fight a system, fight the healthcare system, fight the social care system. Everything they're having to do is fight because they're disadvantaged from birth and postcode. So we need to have a society look at how we are creating long-term problems for us. Because going back to Paul's earlier point, we get it wrong when they're young. We are seeding in crime, social problems, mental health problems. There's no point coming along and fixing it later on in life. So we need to think about the distribution of resources and the fair allocation. It comes down to fairness. Education is not fair at the moment. It's not fair at all. So we need to create a fairer, more equitable education system that creates a fairer, more equitable society. And most of the parties at the moment, I'm sorry, you're just skirting around the issues. You're not addressing the core problem. The core problem is from birth. Some children's life chances are set. The school is set. The services they get set. Even their life expectancy is set, and that was Dickensian, and that has to change because we are the one per area that we can change. I'm a working class kid. I got free to university. I got it because there was an opportunity provided by government who is doing something that they're not doing now. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. We're just going to conclude that as our primary section, and we're just going to have a look at our lovely sponsors, and then we'll come back and have a look at secondary.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Have you ever heard of teaching how-tos? Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now it's a reality with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised, socialised platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively, or with their peers, or with their new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for their next webinar. Are you looking for the best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The 3-day conference explores a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and all key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more.
Thanks. We're going to hand over to Paul. Just got to unmute yourself there, Paul.
I was way ahead of you there, Hannah. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. This section, we're going to look at secondary schools and FE. And eagle-eyed viewers will notice that we're actually playing rugby rather than soccer, because we're all being substituted in and out without the need to consult the referee or the FIFA officials or anything. So welcome to John, who's been on the subs bench there for a minute or two. I'm going to start with a slightly broader question. Christopher introduced this program saying that there is a dearth of information among the parties in terms of education, and you have to go digging for information about education. Could you tell me, and I'm going to start with you, Ralph, how important is education to a government?
It varies a lot. I mean, how important it is to a government is a different question from how important it is at an election. At this election, it is really noticeable that it is way down the manifesto priorities, and that there really aren't big policies, big ideas, big promises coming from anywhere. And that must, no, I'm not part of that process. It must just be a reflection of people's understanding of the public mood and what the public's concerns are. I think in terms of the long-term health of the nation, it's absolutely fundamental importance. And we need to, I mean, it's part of producing a coherent society. It's part of producing people who understand how to get on with other people and take things forward and work together. It's part of giving people a set of fundamental skills that they can build on through life to make a success of it for themselves. It's about people's interior life. There is so much about education that is fundamental to what we do, and I hope that what the lack of stuff in the manifestos mean is that we will have we won't come into the next government with a whole set of rigid policies decided in advance by a few policy wonks to put in the manifesto. We will start with a set of really open minds and realization of the challenges. And whichever party ends up in government, that we will have the opportunity for a decade of thoughtful change.
So Ralph, are you saying that education is something of a department the importance can vary depending on whether it's for an election or what the priorities of the government are. Surely education is always vital and should be front and center. It's human beings, it's real lives, and it never goes away.
Well, it's important. It's where I spend my life, and so it's always top of my list. But I'm just observing the manifestos, and it, no, we have not got Blair's education at the top of things. We have got both major parties making fundamental criticisms of universities, and with certainly and plans for reforming secondary education and associated. So I think there is a feeling that things need to change, but no clear idea of what that change should be. And played right, that means that the ideas from change can come from the profession and come from society rather than being imposed by a few political thinkers. And I find that a very positive place to be, because education doesn't lose its importance just because it's not in the manifestos, but it does give people the opportunity to push for thoughtful change, and that's not usual. Most manifestos say we're going to do this in the next 5 years, and then you're stuck with that.
Okay, thank you. Joe, what about you? How important is education to a government?
Well, I think it's really important, as I tried to stress earlier. I disagree about, I think you're probably right about the public perception of it currently. I don't know if that's because, again, you know, I guess the cost of living thing has consumed people so much, or the fear about the NHS or something has sort of topped it this time round. So I think that might be part of it as well. But again, I think in the 5 missions, you know, breaking down the barriers to opportunity, which is the heading, is embedded really in all of the other missions. Really, you know, the idea about growth, which I think we can do in a green sort of way as well, and making, you know, and getting the green energy superpower and back to the NHS and making our Britain streets safer and stuff. I think in all of those, there's an educational element to it. Back to what was said about the importance of making sure children are kind of good citizens with the good sort of educational and social skills they need. And I think that builds into to jobs. I mean, not to disagree too much with the Green Party, because I think there's big overlaps as there are in all of this sort of things that we're talking about. But you know, if we get our school kind of curriculum right, but there aren't the jobs and the opportunity out there, then in some respects you could say, well, where are they going to? So they need to have the pathways, they need to have the support really out there, they need to know. And I think that's a big thing. So even in the, you know, sort of Angela Rayner's New Deal for working people, I think that's important, because I think what a great deal of the anger is out there with some people, or the kind of detachment from families and children from the school, is because they can projectionally look ahead and see there aren't good, secure jobs in the future. And so I think if you've lost sight of that, and students can see that because they can see it with their own parents who are on 0-hour contracts, or, you know, not getting enough money to bring it in, that makes children lose heart. So I think education is at the centre of all of this, if I'm being honest with you. As a secondary school teacher, having to teach under, as we all have, you know, this kind of new Goverian revolution for the last decade, which has drained the fun away, has become too detached from, you know, it's just too knowledge heavy. And so, you know, if we can change that, and I think Labour have put that quite centre, really. I mean, speaking to lots of parents who want to see more art in school, you know, be it obviously from the drama to, and I would include food in that. Back to the earlier question at the start, you know, lots of parents and lots of young people don't know how to cook. We know there's a movement out there, of which I'm part of a parents group, talking about phone use and social media. And a parent yesterday at the same thing, when I was helping to kind of serve the food and whatever, spoke to me of a student I teach, and she's taken her phone away from her daughter, and purely because of the worry and the concern and the impact, and she's now cooking more, going out more, you know, going for walks, doing more art stuff. Because let's face it, back to the big picture here, so much of what young people do is being kind of dictated. And back to your kind of Dickensian point, the idea of a child being, you know, seen but not heard. In some cases, as we know, some children aren't seen or heard. They're upstairs in the bedroom. The parents don't know what's going on. And so, you know, all of those social fabric things.
Okay, Joel, thank you. I'm going to stop you there. I want to give everybody a fair crack on the same question. And,
can I jump in first, Paul? Because you know
I knew Hannah was going to come in there. Come on.
I'm just going to jump in because I'm an art teacher and food tech teacher, ironically, and originally trained as a DT teacher. But like DT jobs are kind of disappearing. The expense schools have to keep workshops going, same as my schools recently. They've still got food as an enrichment, but it is dropping, so it's only the kids that select it. Because it seems to be with budgets being squeezed that it is the arts and the DT and the food that is getting cut from secondary schools because they just physically cannot fund them. Is there a way to kind of fund it and actually say, like, these subjects have to have a certain amount of funding rather than they be the easy targets for budgets to be cut? Because you say it's really important for them to do it, and I love the fact the arts are going to go into potentially the Progress 8 scores. But Joe, how do you actually see the schools actually being made to do this?
Made to?
Well, important and emphasise that they should.
Yeah, well, obviously schools want to. I mean, obviously the progress stuff, which we know is quite rightly talking about. If the progress is, that shouldn't be all powerful, should it? We all teach students with target datas and whatever else that we feel, becomes a pressure to them rather than the fun side of it. But I guess that will end up as budget allocations for school, and that needs to be increased, or they need to make sure that that is ring fence for it, really. I mean, everyone knows the best rooms in most schools are the art rooms, aren't they? All the DT workshops, the places where children have been able to show their skills in a different way are always the most fabulous. Certainly in the eight schools I've worked in, they've always the best places to be. And I think that needs to be more kind of celebrated and less, sort of seen. Again, obviously, we know the core skills of English and maths are important as well, in science and what have you. But I just think if there is a gear shift and a change kind of nationally with more emphasis on that, then schools will pick that up. And I think, again, we'll get better, healthier, happier children from it.
Thank you. Yeah. Rob, if I could come to you, and if we can, let's stay nice and focused. How important is education to a government?
Well, I think Ralph started off the conversation by saying that it's not very high up the agenda for most political parties. To be honest, it's the sixth policy statement in our manifesto. I think it is incredibly important. In fact, the very underpinning of the Lib Dem Party is about nobody being enslaved by poverty, ignorance, or conformity. And we've always thought that instead of regulation, you educate people, and education is the key to social mobility. That's a real key principle of kind of the Lib Dems. I think when we're talking about how important it is in this election, I think what a lot of people do is they go out and they kind of say, right, how important is education to you during this election? What are you thinking about? And political parties build their messaging around what's important for the public at that time. And I think it just shows a general apathy, perhaps not apathy, but perhaps more priorities for other people in things like the cost of living and the NHS. And I think that's probably why that's being pushed a little bit harder, because things like sewage in the rivers are taking precedence in people's minds at the moment. But in all honesty, I think that's because we've been lurching from crisis to crisis to crisis nationally over the past kind of 8 years. I think once parents really realise that actually their child hasn't been taught by an English specialist for 2 years, they've been taught by long-term supply, and it gets to the GCSE crunch where they're kind of 3 grades behind the target grade, then I think parents will probably start to go, oh no, education is a little bit of a priority. And I think we'll probably see that in about 3 years. And actually, we need to act now so that we're not in that situation in a couple of years' time in terms of the crisis. Going back to Hannah's point on art subjects, super important. And I was talking to, so I'm a languages teacher, so I feel really acutely stuff being cut from the curriculum. We're going down from 5 hours curriculum time to 4 hours curriculum time this year, because we can't replace the teacher. And it's similar we've got a food tech person in at the moment who isn't a qualified food tech teacher. So the kids can't put stuff in and out of the ovens. We have to rely on somebody who is kind of food tech qualified if they ever want to cook. Otherwise they have to do no bake stuff, which I just find a complete anathema in terms of food technology. It's not helping them. It's not teaching them. And I think the idea of including things like the arts, like music, like drama, it into the EBAC group would actually really help that sort of stuff, because I think there is a big priority for schools to focus on the things that they're being judged on, the subjects that they're being judged on. And I think those ones in the open bucket at secondary end up being a little bit kind of pushed under the carpet because they're not kind of scrutinized enough. And that's absolutely not right, because those are the things that shape kind of, the comfort, like the liberation from conformity and that sort of stuff. So,
well, thank you. Yeah. Brent, how important is education to a government?
Completely important. Again, I take exception with Ralph. Its variation should always be top and center. Education rescued a child from the troubles like me and helped me get beyond my own limits, and has rescued many other children around the world. It's a social mobility issue. It's a national efficiency issue. But I have to then say to myself, how important was education during COVID? We were front and center when we were needed. And then when we asked for it, we got nothing back in return, not even a pay rise. I stand with my colleagues in the unions on the picket line fighting for education. My educational spokesperson is an actual teacher. That's how important education is to the Green Party. It's front and center. And it's front and center because it's a way to make society fairer, equal, and giving everybody the equal opportunities that everybody deserves in this country, where we change the outcomes, we rescue people, we reform them, we grow the country, the whole country, not the politics that we get when the people are played off each other, when kids are played off each other, because that's unfortunately the education system we have baked in, a feudal system still in operation with disadvantage baked into it at every level. So education for the Green Party is another way that we would like to make a fairer, more equitable society. And that underpins and underscores my values as a teacher, my values as a Green, my values as a trade unionist, my values as a socialist, and what I would say the Labour Party used to be, but have lost, because the two major political parties have set the agenda in this election. All I am is a smaller political party trying to get traction for issues like education. But they've set the agenda, and there's a wall of silence coming from. One doesn't want to admit there is a problem. The second doesn't want to admit that actually they're not going to do much about the problem. And that leaves parties like ourselves and the Lib Dems trying as hard as we can. No, let me finish.
Just keep it focused on TTR. Okay. We'll keep it focused on TTR. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would any of our hosts like to just make a quick response before I read a message from our sponsors?
Just to note that the education is 12th item out of 12 in the Green Manifesto. So it's all parties.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ralph. Yep. John, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if I have a quick response.
John, could we fix your sound first?
Oh, righto. I've unmuted.
Okay, go ahead again, John.
How's that sound?
It is a bit better. Go ahead, yeah.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for that. I sort of a quick response. Also introduce a secondary education sort of FE direction as well to the discussion. Hopefully.
I think we're going to come to that afterwards, John. Maybe. Yeah. But go ahead. But go ahead. Yeah.
Right. Jolly good. So far, first of all, I'd like to agree with Ralph's observation that this is a thin manifesto. It's not a policy-led, particularly election. It's an election about changing a government in many ways, and lots of the discussion is around competence and all sorts of things of that kind and values. However, elections are a chance to rethink some pretty important things. And one thing from a secondary FE point of view is, in this country, we are led too much by a narrow focus on exams. And there was, in 2023, there was a Lords Select Committee investigation into assessment. It made some important recommendations about widening and thinking more imaginatively about the way we examine students in secondary education and higher education. And I know the Conservatives have suggested the Advanced British Standard, and there are some suggestions from the other parties of a review. But it's important, I think, that we recognise that if we were going back to Brent's point about Dickensian education, that if you did come from Dickensian times, as it were, into the 20th century, you would be very familiar with the examination hall, the wobbly desk, the high stress exams, and the narrow focus on certain sorts of assessment. We don't assess oracy, we don't assess creativity, and we don't assess creativity. I've said that already. Collaboration enough. And I think we need to think again about exams in secondary education. So I would implore all parties to think about that.
Can I just come in there? Sorry, Paul. Sorry,
Joe.
Paul.
Yeah.
So just on that thing, sort of no, so far people haven't mentioned the Ofsted thing, that awful word, but obviously the scorecard change, which of course Labour have said they want to do, and also Welsh Labour are going to talk about kind of curriculum. I mean, you know, they have looked at it again, and I don't quite know totally their new system, but that is a much more focus back to what was just said by John there. So I think there's other models out there that we can work with and look at. But I think you're right. This is a chance for change. Sorry, I thought I'd get a line in there. And it is a chance to change. Yeah. Sorry.
I think we'll be coming to Ofsted later. Hannah, have you anything you'd like to add there? Unmute yourself, Hannah.
I'm dictating a you, Paul. So in terms of kind of, obviously we've talked, we're going to come to Ofsted in a little bit, but in terms of kind of moving, like we are going to move on to further education in a moment, but I know a lot of, I'm also a careers lead and talking about kind of work experience and that thing, like you said, because there is a lot of emphasis on exams, but how do we actually set up these students for real life and kind of life after school?
Yeah. Christopher, what about you?
I've got something on Ofsted, Paul, but shall I save that till we come back?
I think we'll do that after this short break, when we come back and we look at Ofsted, IGCSE's curriculum review, and what John would like to see in changes to secondary education. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbooks.com to explore the full range of titles. You can use the code JCTTR2425 and you can get 20% off your order. Teaching how-tos. Have you heard of teaching how-tos? Imagine having your own institutional coach available 24/7. Now it's reality with Teaching How-To's platform. This is a highly personalized social platform, empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques. Interested to find out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for the next webinar. Reading solutions. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from International Reading Conference for free. The 3-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators. Sign up and receive recordings for free at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk. Apps for Good. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more. So thank you to all our sponsors. Welcome back, everybody. Christopher, let me go to you. I know you want to say something about Ofsted, and you also have an idea for a policy around IGCSEs. So pitch in where you like, Christopher.
Perfect, thank you. Well, I don't know where to go with this one, because on the one hand, I'm quite heartened to hear that none of our prospective parliamentary candidates thought that Ofsted was significant enough to put right at the top of their education manifesto, because there are much, much more important things that happen in classrooms than that. But also, I do think it is the big issue of the moment that we need to explore, really. I'd quite like to see an alternative inspection system implemented. And if I was responsible for education policy in England, what I'd be looking to do would be to replace Ofsted with a new inspection body for which any school teacher on pay scale M5 or above can be summoned, like jury service, to serve a 3-year term as a school's inspector within their own area of expertise and deployed in inspection teams within their own region and beyond their own region where convenient. They've got skills, they've got important knowledge, they've got a good understanding how school cultures work in their own settings. What better way to develop their experience and knowledge than to take them into other settings and make that part of a significant professional development program? Look, we all know Ofsted has become too big, too remote, too corporate, and probably too overbearing to do its job in the way that it should be doing its job, I think. If we want an inspection body to raise standards of teaching and learning in schools, which Ofsted suggests it's kind of doing by its process actually existing, then we need much more natural and dynamic movement, I think, between inspection teams and the everyday classroom. And effective schools are not solely shaped by leadership teams. Everybody here on this call today knows this. They're formed by the patient, gifted, and well-trained practitioners delivering lessons in every teaching space every day of the academic year. Teachers, in my view, don't just need a voice in the inspection system, they need a hand in it. I'd like to see that in a manifesto pretty quickly.
Yeah, super point, Christopher. And, you know, before I go to a very quick, and I will hold you to a very, very quick response to what Christopher said there, you know, one of the irks I have is that Ofsted admit that their job is not to raise standards. What's their purpose? Why have them if they're not there to raise standards? But look, that's in addition to what Christopher was saying, which in a very unfair summary to what he said is, you know, put teachers in with them to go to visit schools to see what's what. Rob, what would you think of that? Really sharp, really quickly, please.
I think we've got to look at the fundamental reason that, exactly as you said, Paul, the fundamental reason that Ofsted exists. And part of my concern about that, Chris, would be that there perhaps wasn't consistency moving forwards, and one school might be judged in a completely different manner than another school. And I think we'd have to work really, really hard to make sure that didn't happen. We are looking at removing Ofsted one-word judgments. I think that's, you know, it's Dylan William, isn't it? You don't give somebody a grade because they're only going to compare it with their next door neighbour, so you give them some feedback on how they can improve. And actually I think that's what schools are crying out for. Ofsted don't have the same kinds of reputation that they had a couple of years ago amongst teachers anymore, and it just seems like a spectre in the back of the classroom.
They have a very different reputation nowadays. Yeah. Look, thank you, Rob.
I don't think it's a respected reputation.
Thank you. Ralph, you mentioned you wanted to put some of the power and the decision-making back to teachers and in the classroom. What do you think of Chris's idea to put teachers in with Ofsted and inspectors?
I think it's an excellent idea. I think really reconnecting the whole inspection process with schools, letting it drive school improvement, letting it drive innovation, would be really important. It would be a very fundamental reform of Ofsted. Need accountability in there too, but yes, let's have a go.
Do inspections drive improvement?
Yes, because you're enabling parents to look in at the school and see what's going on. If it's done.
Wait a minute, but how does that help? How does that drive improvement? Because in that process, you ought to have access to a lot of ways of doing. If the school says discipline is terrible, if Ofsted says discipline is terrible, something gets done about it. Wait a minute.
That ought to be the process.
Rob gave us a brilliant description of how parents, generations of parents, are switched off. I'm old enough to have taught generations, including grandparents. They do not support institutions. Allowing parents a say in schools is reckless. It has to be reckless. Teachers are professionals, we're trained and so on. Surely we know what we're doing.
Absolutely, but I'm a believer that parents are responsible for their children's education. I'm a great supporter of that as the underlying principle. And if we need to get back to parents and improve what they're doing, then let's
fair point. Yeah,
bring back national service. There we are.
Oh gosh, we might come to that. Hold on to that, Ralph. Joe, what about putting teachers in with inspections? They're the experts. They know what they're doing. Ofsted is broken. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. As I said about the Ofsted scorecard earlier, sorry for jumping the gun on that one. But yeah, I mean, once again, it's been shown that it's not. It carries far too much fear, doesn't it? I think, and there's not enough kind of support in the whole system. Schools don't feel it's a supportive process. They feel like they have to suddenly, become, or they worry they become something they're not. And there has to be some kind of outside experience. I like that sort of idea, Christopher, about getting the kind of cheery service idea of sharing good practice, as I do the RSE audits of other schools across my kind of county, really. And that's what I do, is go in and look at, and that's a really good process, and schools don't mind that. I think if the system was done in a kind of supportive way, with an oversight of what is done and what areas need to be improved, I think we can all walk into each other's schools and look at things, and that doesn't have to be a negative experience. But currently, it just comes with far too many. Yeah,
got your point. Thanks, Joe. Brent, what about you?
Yeah, again, how skirting around the issue. Ofsted's a busted flush. It has been. Our policy has been since 2015 to abolish Ofsted. Everything in the last 9 years has proven exactly correct. Ofsted is now responsible for the death of head teachers. That's a fact. It's destroyed careers, it's destroyed schools, it's destroyed education, and connected to it is the CEOs and the academization and high-stakes testing. Our education system is in need of a reform, an actual reform, not skirting around the actual issue. And I agree, Christopher, absolutely. Involve teachers in that. You can more welcome to join the Green Party and help us write policy, which is member-driven, evidence-driven. Evidence-driven. Ofsted, the irony of Ofsted about evidence. Let's use evidence of Ofsted against Ofsted, because the evidence is showing that Ofsted itself has failed. If I was to Ofsted, it is a failure itself. So let's start again with a more kind of passionate way of measuring children and schools.
Yeah, I think they've made their evidence up the odd time as well.
Well, it's politicized. It's used. It's a political. It's been corrupted and turned into a political thing where you get an education secretary quoting Ofsted as if it's Bible, and that's manipulating figures. And that is debasing education when you're basically gaslighting the country into saying standards are improving, when the reality on the ground is it's toxic. It's destroyed lives. It needs to be abolished. Like the union, we, the Green Party, agree with the union stance on it. Abolish it. No scorecards, 2 week, abolish it.
Well, look, thank you very much, everybody. As ever, this section of the program has been far too short, like every section. But at this point, I want to thank you all for your contributions on secondary and FE education. And I'm going to hand you back to the lovely Hannah, who is still muted.
I'm so used to hosting the whole thing that I don't need to normally unmute myself. I'm just going to give Ralph an opportunity just to respond to Brent if you'd want to before we move on, and then we'll go on to higher education.
I go far enough back in education to remember what life was like before effective accountability, and the children who were failed for generation after generation. I don't want to get back there. I really want to see if we can move on from where we are. I do share a lot of the disquiet about where Ofsted has got to, but I don't believe that abolishing accountability, getting back to the session where parents couldn't see inside a school, you just delivered your child and took them back and didn't know what was going on and had no influence and had no way of knowing what was going on and no sense that things might improve one day. Don't want to be back there. So I would like, I'm a believer in the possibility of doing things better than now and better than then.
Can I be clear, just very clear? I am not talking about abolishing accountability. I'm talking about put accountability back in the hands of the people who have on the ground, who know, experts, local community. It takes a community in a school. We've lost the community because these academies are absolutely not accountable. CEOs are not accountable. We're turning education into a business, and in business, you're accountable to shareholders. We need to get rid of that. And Ofsted's been corrupted again. to do exactly that. We need accountability. Absolutely. No, we're not talking about getting rid of accountability free for all. Well, I want accountability, but I want support from Ofsted. If it did exist, support. That's what we used to have. It's been corrupted and turned into a watchdog and a fear organization. That's the difference. So yes, we need accountability, but not the type of accountability that we're currently getting. Just to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to further education now. I've obviously been at university. I'm currently at university, kind of online studying. So I just find further education really interesting. But I'm kind of going to link it a little bit to secondary. The thing that I've noticed since going back to university is that very much technology has massively moved forward. Some of my lectures are delivered by AI robots, for example. But also in secondary school, there seems to be a real gap between what schools have in terms of technology. Like previous schools I had, the whole entire trust got whole entire new electric interactive whiteboards, but a new school that I've got doesn't even have projectors that are overly focused and needs updating. How do we make sure that funding is, like, I know we've got kind of our lovely sponsors and stuff that are helping kind of bridge that gap, but why is kind of technology not streamlined across all the schools, and how are we kind of bridging that gap? Because it seems to be somewhere that kind of premium students, for example, are going to be more behind and therefore less likely to go on to things like university because they're not getting that kind of technological advancements. Joe, did you want to speak on that one?
I was just going to talk about the digital poverty, I guess, element, which we know is a real thing. Definitely. And obviously COVID showed that, didn't it? And you know, the government again sort of tried to step in with all these measures that didn't seem to amount to much really, which was really kind of sort of frustrating. But yeah, and I guess in some ways the cost of living, yet again, you know, that widening gap, I think, sort of manifests itself in some young people not having the actual physical tools, the digital tools, I guess. And that means sometimes schools find it quite hard to plug the gap because they haven't got the funds themselves and they don't want to make students stand out by not having some of the tech, which obviously other students have. So I think, and that's obviously tech both the school might have, but also personally they might have at home or they're able to bring in. And back to my phone issue, we know they often the tool of how that's used. And there's scales, is there not about what phones can do and what apps you might have on them or they can have them, or back to data. You know, if some students haven't got data and they're not always hooked into the Wi-Fi, they are practical things. So in that sense, obviously schools have, and we know they spend kind of so much money, did they not, on making sure there's a provision of the digital stuff. But I went and did a talk at the sixth form on Friday, and students walk in with their phones and they scan into the session. I mean, wow, I hadn't seen that really before. So it's just making sure again that we have the funding to allow a more kind of equal level for all students and their families, I guess, to access, isn't it? Because, you know, like this, we do lots of online parents sessions now. We do them in physically, but also online, and lots of students can't access that either from home. So yeah, lots to look at really.
Thank you. Paul's message in again. Why aren't schools funded equally, even their own regions? Is there a difference in the importance of children? Brent, I know you've pointed to that. Do you want to respond on that one?
Yeah, I'm in the fourth poorest area of the country in an old deindustrialised area of the East Midlands, and our children get like $6,000. I had a question at Hustings recently when the lady was saying to me, why is the council tax in our area higher than parts of London? And I said, well, hold on a second. The education funding in this area is lower, but your council tax is higher. And I mentioned Camden. I said, well, Camden's got like £11,000 per pupil in London. And then she went, well, that's one of the lowest for council tax. You're like, hold on a second here. We're being discriminated against. And that's what it is. It's discrimination. Parts of this country discriminated against. It's just call it what it is. Our children by outcomes, places where I'm living, the industrialised areas, working class kids just don't get the same funding. I've got schools in this area here. For the last 6 weeks, I've had no ICT because the company they bought in the services from now were privatised, stopped providing the ICT services because the school ran out of money. So I've got English teachers who can't use ICT. South Korean children got laptops and iPads in 2011. Our children are absolutely so far behind, it's unbelievable. And our government's so far behind. None of them have an AI policy. I helped write the first political party's AI policy. Where are they on this? I tell you where they are with this. AI is going to replace us. They keep telling us AI is going to replace and going to make our lives a lot easier. Well, since technology has been invented, has a teacher's life got actually easier? I don't trust people with this technology in the future, because there is a deprofessionalization of our industry. There is a recruitment and retention crisis. And guess what's going to, we can use more AI, especially when you have private educators. And that will start to happen. You will have in the future educators who are one-to-one in nice schools paying into a system, and our state sector with probably the worst technology and no funding and children left behind. That's exactly what is happening. It's not just happening in society, it's happening in our schools fundings, our schools locations. We have a postcode lottery when it comes to the digital divide. Joe's actually correct, but it comes back to funding again. It comes back to prioritizing and funding education. We'd put 14 billion into education, and that's not going to come from VAT in schools, because that's just going to create maybe $1 billion or so. We'd have to talk about the redistribution of wealth, but also the redistribution of educational wealth, not just wealth full stop. There is a disparity in funding in this country, and the areas getting the least are the areas that need it the most. That needs looked at. That is absolutely baking in to the social mobility problem, and that's baking in crime, it's baking in all those things. When education is not working, other parts of society aren't working, and that is then becoming a cyclical issue. And somebody mentioned earlier, Rob, you mentioned earlier on about, those things that are starting to happen in certain areas, and they keep going around in circles, and we have to break them. That's exactly what happens when schools are failing, the community gets failed. That's what we need to, and if we are to embrace the technology of the future in a global market, British children are so far behind. Last piece of evidence, uptake in computers and programming is down. The uptake in now subjects, because schools are forcing kids into baccalaureate subjects. Why? Because that gives them more points in the bucket system in order to get Ofsted off their back. All comes back to the same thing. All comes back to league tables. All comes back to playing a game. Not what the children need, what you need to do in order to tick a certain box. That's where education is.
John, have you got a question about further education?
Yeah, I think my question is, I think governments of the future need to decide what they think universities are for, in a sense. We've had the idea that for a number of years, we need more and more people going to university. Then A-levels were changed so that it became, in a sense, more difficult to go to university. We don't fund universities properly. We certainly impoverish the FE section, FE education in this country. So in a sense, we need to look at, what do we want? Do we want a graduate population? Do we want an expanded university sector? Or do we want to provide some kind of broader education for people when they leave school at 16 and 18? Well, at least they've got finish education at 18.
Could I come on that one, Hannah?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Once again, back to Labour's policies on this and their plans, they have got the plan to have the new kind of tech excellent colleges, which they want to build, which I think is a really good way to try and bridge that gap to what John just said, and making sure that we have the pathways. I was talking to our kind of careers person, Hannah, at school last week, and her worry is just how many students slip through the gap that end up, not going off to college. I guess they become the NEET in some ways, but especially again that segue into how many SEND students that is that don't seem to have the places at college or the support and the funding for that as well. So yeah, just to make sure that there is a real focus on that. And we've heard it. We've had, I'm sure you guys have had spokesmen from sort of Cambridge and Oxford again, and back to the point about how lots of courses aren't getting support they need. There's not languages uptake at Cambridge, I believe, has fallen off a cliff edge. And I fear, I'll mention the other word if I mention Ofsted too early, obviously Brexit's had an impact on that, because that's made lots of people look again and distance themselves from Europe. So all of that stuff, I think, feeds into it really. So I think a refocus on, John, you're right, on what the pathways need to be in the future, what college support FE, and then obviously beyond that as well, but also our links to Europe. We know that, I thought that would come up sort of more than it has so far, but just how much links we need to have with Europe, so students can have those pathways physically into work there as well. And I guess that is another mess up, I'll call it, of the bad Brexit deal we've got, that, and well, Brexit itself, I'd be honest and say, that have made people turn away from both the pathways to the future, to the jobs, but also a lot of that interacting with Europe.
Christopher, did you have a point to make about that?
Yeah, I certainly did. I wondered if any parties had a particular position on renegotiating our entry to the Erasmus scheme. It seems to me to be a significant thing that we've lost as a consequence of going into a new Brexit future. I mean, if we're looking to beef up our nation's cultural and soft power, it seems to me very straightforward that the direction of movement ought to be back into that scheme, particularly as we've now moved back into Horizon, which apparently our scientists are very happy about in our research institutions. Erasmus is also at the later end of a student's learning, because learning doesn't stop at FE or indeed at the end of higher education. It continues as students move into various career paths in the workplace. The Erasmus scheme is currently funding internship placements for European youngsters to gain really vital diplomatic and policy experience in leading institutions like NATO. At the moment, none of our citizens who are solely British citizens are eligible for that kind of scheme. So I think there's also longer term benefits if we move back into Erasmus for the English education system. Rob, as a MFL teacher, you might see more students taking up MFL study in the UK, particularly if they can see that their skills they're learning in the classroom are going to be put to use in some kind of long-term project in a foreign country. That's surely going to be an exciting motivator. And Europe-wide schools, as well as universities, will find exchanges much easier to organise. The Turing scheme at the moment, which is a replacement, only funds UK students going out. It doesn't fund the foreign students coming in, and any exchange programme is literally a process of give and take, and the Turing scheme doesn't live up to that. So I'd be interested to know who is seriously considering proposing that the next government should be renegotiating Erasmus entry. It ought to be a pressing educational priority for any new government of whatever colour.
Rob, it looks like you're desperate to respond to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a product of the Erasmus system as well. So I did a law degree and I studied French law in France for 2 years, got my degree over there. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried on the day of the referendum result, because I went into school and thought the kids that I'm teaching today won't have the same opportunities that I've had. And I thought that was a real shame that we were taking rights away from them. The Lib Dems absolutely have committed to a four-step approach to Europe. Very early on in that approach is recommitting to the Horizon and Erasmus schemes. And of course, it's not just being able to go and study abroad for students, Christopher. There's also there's great CPD for teachers in the Erasmus Plus scheme. In my previous school, I took a lot of teachers abroad to Germany, to Spain, to Italy for a week, where they learned language skills and they learned how to kind of pass on kind of those language skills in their relevant subjects as well. So that was fully funded by Europe. I also took the first French school exchange out of St Helens since the 1980s, which was funded by Europe. We managed to take a group of 18-year-old disengaged language students out to France for a week, which was absolutely amazing. Those opportunities for people who haven't ever been out of the country before have completely been robbed from our younger generations. And there is a massive disengagement, as you rightly said, in languages and the way that we perceive languages in this country now, because we've become this kind of like isolationist kind of country with regard to international education.
Sorry, can I just jump in there before Paul? Sorry, Paul, you're going to speak when you just to say, and it's not just in languages or the Erasmus thing, which again I think that Labour should pursue. I should know if they are or not, but I definitely think they should. But also on the music front, the arts as well, not just languages. Of course, that's been lost, and it's good to see kind of Elton John yesterday back in Labour about that, because I think he was trying to stress that if you lose those access, not just in a language sense, but also the kind of connections with Europe through music as well, that's really kind of detrimental. So, you're right, it's the outward facing thing, which I think, as we're talking about, schools need to do anyway, about sharing and working with other schools to encourage and support each other. I think it's true with us in Europe as well.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Yeah, very quickly. Cultural capital. I've had friends of mine went through Erasmus and increased their cultural capital. Exactly, Rob. And like you, I cried when Britain left the European Union for other reasons as well, because Paul and I would know the situation that it created and the trauma it created after that. Green Party is not going to lie to people. We would like to get back in the European Union as soon as possible, as soon as it is possible. But we would want closer European integration. As somebody sits in 2 policy working groups, in the Green Party, one is the European Union, the other is education. We are definitely looking at as many integration policies as possible to give our students the best opportunities. But added to that, we would end tuition fees. And also we would restore the maintenance grant at 16. So we want to encourage our brightest and best, because what I'm seeing now in the UK is brain drain. We're seeing our brightest and best leave the country. The immigration debate seems to have dominated this election, but there's another side of the immigration debate nobody's talking about. That's the 600,000 people who left the UK last year, who we educate and we work really hard to, but we're losing our doctors, our lawyers, our teachers, our dentists. We're losing the cultural capital, and we're losing our brightest and best of young people in this country. And unfortunately, that is part of what's been happening, because we are telling children, you should not go to university now. That's the case. We should be encouraging children to enrich themselves, to grow themselves. And on the language argument, you're right, Rob, absolutely right. There is this culture now of, why do I need to learn a foreign language? Well, I always say to children, you learn a foreign language because you're actually going to appreciate your own language more, because you translate it back into your own language more, because language teachers, that's what I call modern foreign languages. And I think that debate needs to be had and saying learning another language enriches your understanding of your own. And that's quite patriotic, because learning another language doesn't mean you're somehow neglecting your own language. And that's why we need to have that debate within the wider country and say, you can still have your own identity. You're not going to be less English if you learn a foreign language. In fact, you're going to have a better appreciation of your own language as well. So that's my view.
Just to pick up an aspect of Brent's point there, Adam, if I could just come to you very briefly, because I know one of the things that interests you is a kind of a new curriculum that would have, IT based on it, and you're keen to look at teaching and education around AI. Now, yeah. I'm a linguist as well. Glad to hear you are, Rob. Very jealous you got to do your degree in France. But nowadays, they sell this software. It comes on your phone. You can go to France, Italy, Germany, wherever, and you don't need to speak the language, which I think is it really, speaking the language is so enriching. It's so much fun, even if you just go on holiday, to be able to order something in the language of the country is fantastic. But Adam, how does that match up then, Brent's point with future and AI and apps and devices?
Yeah, well, I think there's 2 things going on. I think kind of as a qualified ICT teacher back in the day in 2004, there was kind of a real clear vision with ICT in terms of helping students understand not only the technology they've got in front of them, but also how that technology fits into their kind of wider world. And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of schools, ICT has taken a bit of a back step. And, I've heard kind of anecdotally that ICT now is taught by non-specialists more and more and more as we kind of fill in the gaps. I think Brent's one of them there. So I think there's a fundamental flaw there in that we've got all this technology, we're giving it to our students to take away with them a lot of the time, but a lot of the times they just don't know how to use it productively, efficiently, effectively for their own learning. And I would like to see a real push on digital literacy. I think, again, AI has, come onto us as a profession. I don't think there's been a big reaction centrally to AI in terms of any policy. And so therefore, there hasn't been anything kind of curriculum based with AI. So again, our students have just kind of run off with it. And unfortunately, a bit like the mobile phone and other things, they've started to learn very bad habits because they've basically been left to their own, literally their own devices here. And part of our sell as teachers is that we can actually kind of have input here and think about kind of how we want these technologies, these devices to impact on the learning within our environments. We've done a couple of sessions on education tonight about how the mobile phone and technology is impacting on all sorts of students' health, mental health, physical health, and that type of thing. But we're not kind of producing any curriculum stuff that actually helps, really focus on, how to use these technologies properly. The push seems to be now, certainly with AI, well, we don't know what we're doing, so let's ban it. A bit like the mobile phone. We don't know what we're doing, so let's just ban it, because then it's just that's the easy fix. But it's not the easy fix, because I know people in industry and they're saying, why are students coming out of school without knowledge of how to use these technologies? It's a fundamental part of their next steps.
Apologies, I've got to head off now, but if I can just say, I entirely agree. I think that's a really, really constructive direction to go in. Let's really mine teachers' knowledge and understanding as to how to take a step forward, because government finds it really difficult to move at the speed technology moves. You're there seeing what's happened day to day. Let's find ways of giving you the power and make secondary education much less tramline, much more diverse. Open up university admissions to a wider range of qualifications and a lot of micro credentials, whatever it takes to deal well by our children in an environment which is changing so fast. And we won't do it by centralizing this. We've got to rely on what teachers are seeing on the ground.
Ralph,
but thank you. This has been a really good morning, and I've enjoyed being part of it very much. Thank you.
Ralph, that's a super point to end on, and I'm going to interpret that as an outstanding endorsement of teachers and teaching. Oh, Ralph's gone. But in his absence, I want to thank him. Oh, he's back. Oh, he's back.
No, he's still here. I'm always happy to listen to a bit of praise. Don't get annoyed.
Great endorsement for teachers. Great point to end on. And look, thank you very much for your contribution this morning. Very valuable. Thank you very much for your time. It was a great pleasure talking to you. And I say that on behalf of everybody on the panel and at TTR. Thanks, Ralph.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you. Bye.
Rob, I think you had a response there to Brent and Adam. Just if I could press you quickly, because we want to move on to a quick mention from our sponsors and then into the last segment of the program.
Yeah, of course. I think Adam's point is a real good one in terms of we can combine things in the curriculum, and if we're looking holistically at the curriculum, those sorts of things should be able to be pervasive throughout the entire curriculum that we have. We aren't going to be able to use AI very well if you don't have critical thinking skills. You can't put something into ChatGPT and it just comes up with the right answer. You need to be able to analyze that answer and then tell it what it's done wrong and refine that answer. So I don't think AI will.
Everybody's nodding there, Rob. Okay, but tell me this: where is the place in the curriculum? Where's the place for critical thinking?
I think that's where it needs to become more pervasive and more throughout the curriculum. I think it's very easy to teach critical thinking.
I'm just going to stop you again, because we're all teachers here, okay? And we've all been involved. We've all got experience in the past of subjects, issues, or areas that have been what we call in Northern Ireland cross-curricular. In other words, some bright spark somewhere who sits in an office with a suit has thought, do you know what? It'd be really good if teachers did this. I don't know where to put it in the curriculum, but let's just splatter it across everything and see what happens. And then, of course, what happens? Nothing. So how are we going to ensure, that critical thinking, critical literacy is a central, crucial part of the learning and the education of all our children? Because I think there's widespread agreement that without critical thinking and literacy, this generation is going to have massive problems.
I think we need to look at what that actually means, what critical thinking actually means. And I think that's the problem, is there's no kind of standardized definition of what we want to actually teach. And therefore, we need to make sure that that is really crystal clear and then share that through good practice and CPD. Otherwise, you've got a ton of teachers who have their own interpretation of it, kind of teaching their own interpretation of it. And until that is crystallized and there's a kind of a common thread of actually, this is what critical thinking, this is what creativity, and I wouldn't want to define term creativity, but this is kind of a broad definition of creativity. Until we've decided what those actually are on a national scale, then actually we can't really turn around and expect people to implement them into the curriculum, because, you know, we're individuals and we interpret it in different ways.
Can I just, one brief point?
Very big, Brent.
We're in a very dangerous place, because that very dangerous place is going to be, you see a lot of academies that are doing standard curriculums. Teachers' autonomy is being completely nobbled. Non-specialist teachers teaching non-specialist subjects. The technology offers a very quick way for some organizations to streamline their curriculum, take the critical thinking out, take all that deeper stuff out, and literally just teach by whatever the centrally planned thing is. And that's happening a lot more in schools where heads of department don't have that autonomy any longer to do that. And the likes of the Oak Academy and stuff like that is very slippery slope down to, we bought this package in from this company, here's our lessons pre-packaged, you're not an expert. The de-professionalization of our profession is coming. And if you are a CEO who's hard up and your trust's not getting enough money because there's no funding, you will cut corners. And an easy way to cut corners is to centralize your curriculum and to tick those boxes and use that technology in order to take the classroom teacher out of that. And that is a very slippery slope. If we do not get ahead of this,
after these messages, we're looking at teacher recruitment, and what you're saying might fit in. So let's have a word from our sponsors.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Have you ever heard of teaching how-tos? Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now it's a reality with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised, socialised platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively, or with their peers, or with their new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for their next webinar. Are you looking for the best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The 3-day conference explores a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and all key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more.
Welcome back, everybody, and thank you very much for sticking with us. It's something of a marathon session, but we're in the last leg now, and Hannah and I are going to co-chair this session. We're going to look at that thorny business of teacher recruitment. I have 2 children, 2 adult children, and everybody in my family is a teacher with big history of being educationists and teachers. And when I spoke to my children about jobs and careers and would you like to be children boys, they looked at me. They looked at, are you wise? Are you wise, Daddy? Not a hope. You know, there's a lot of teacher bashing. That's a public sport. I think they considered it in the Olympics. We've got Ofsted at the end of hard terms and days and putting huge effort in. We've got difficult parents. We've got exams where we're measured and scrutinized to an inches of our life. As a body, we're often invalidated. We're on the front line of everything. I remember in 2012, my wife and I watching the riots. And we said, well, when will teachers be blamed? It was the following Tuesday. Social media poverty. What needs to be done in order to make teaching attractive and to resolve this crisis of people leaving teaching and people not coming in? Joe, what needs to be done?
Yeah, I was just thinking that back to the criticism that was made earlier. You know, whilst Ralph has left, I feel bad now saying this, but of course, his leader did talk about Mickey Mouse kind of degrees, didn't he, and what have you. So there was a lot of that sort of criticism aimed at, and that again is just negative, isn't it? But ultimately, it's really sort of, I guess, built in and baked in to say in the idea of just the general frustration that I think lots of parents feel out there. Again, that schools aren't the hub in the places that they feel like they should be. And back to the point earlier, Adam, that you made about the digital stuff and thinking about the critical thinking, you know, using modern tech and the evidence side of things. You know, I teach history. There should be that space in there. There certainly is with me to mention about fake news and misinformation. And that would, I think, if teachers knew, back to the quite right points made earlier about how narrow the curriculum's become, you know, if there was more opportunity for teachers to feel like they could show their enthusiasm for the subject and not feel like they were going to be hemmed in again by Ofsted and league tables and all that pressure. I think if there was a lot more enthusiasm felt from the outside and then a lot more freedom from within, I hope, Paul, that would go a long way to making teaching be seen to be a really positive place and not this place, as you rightly say, where we have to deal with all the social issues.
Super. Point made, Joe. Well made. John, could I come to you?
Thank you. I'll make a quick point. Just an observation of the last few years, something we haven't talked about a lot. Multi-academy trusts, I think they're linked to retention. I think we have a wild west of governance in schools in this country, and a lot of the trusts are not nice places to work in. And I think I have a number of teacher friends still in the profession, I'm retired, who have left because of overt, covert bullying, reviewing people, apparently to assist their teaching practice, but really a chance to get rid of them, and not nice atmospheres in schools that are in competition with each other and led by management-driven cultures. I think the culture of schools and multi-academy trusts have not helped teacher retention.
44% more teachers said they wanted to leave this year than said so in 22-23. Shocking statistic, right? Brent, you're shaking your head.
It goes back to completely agree with John's point. As a union rep, proud union rep, my job is partly a part-time job in union rep. Spurious claims made against staff being driven out, staff being bullied, staff being undermined, over-examined, staff themselves being threatened, harassed. The amount of casework I deal with now is just exceptional. And it goes from the top, having educational secretaries that threw us under the bus, argued with unions about our health and safety during COVID, argued with our health and safety. I felt like lions led by donkeys. The teaching profession has been shamefully treated by successive governments, undermined. And I tell you what they've done. They take advantage of our altruism. They take advantage of our nature. They know we put the children front and center. Those of us still in education are still in education because we believe in the value and the power of education. That's used against the same for nurses and the doctors. They're doing this all the time to us. No other industry would put up. It's funny that privatizing education, but they're not giving us a benefit of privatization of education. We want to get flex. Private businesses get more rights now than people working in some of the public sectors. And we get, oh, you get a good pension. Yeah, if you last long enough in teaching, you get a good pension. But people aren't lasting enough.
I am retired. It's not a good pension at all.
Exactly. Whoa. You got to retire. Wow. The next generation have no chance of getting to retirement. That's the problem.
Adam, can I bring you in on this?
Point, recruitment. It's not just
you have to stop him.
Who are we recruiting from? Who are we recruiting from? We should return to recruiters who are recruiting the correct teachers.
Let me bring Adam in on that.
Coming in, promised a little handshake, do a couple of years and walk back out. We need to get teachers and invest in
communities. Good point. Well made. Adam, let me bring you in there.
Yeah, this brings you back to our normal Thursday night education tonight. Yeah, I mean, my big concern is that obviously there's a big push on pay, and it was all about kind of the strikes that went ahead were about pay. But for me, they didn't really kind of get to the heart of the issue is that teachers are working harder and longer hours than they ever have done before. So we have the technology, we have kind of, lots of research and all this going on, but yet the hours are actually going up. So that's the kind of the thing that I want to ask the panel, not how do we make the job easier, but how do we ensure that teachers aren't burning out? Because I think that's what's going on. They're actually just they're actually fried. They're actually just completely burnt out. And actually, for some teachers, pay, yes, would be great, but actually the fundamental issue is workload, is hours worked, the expectation of how long they actually need to be in the building, working weekends, and that type of thing. So that's a question for the panel about how do we or how do you guys going forward help us cut down on the actual workload that's going on in our education system?
I personally think this comes back down to it's of course it's a recruitment issue as well. So I appreciate the things about the pension, and I had this conversation with my head teacher the other day, and she said, "Do you know what? My other half sits down, gets downstairs at 8 o'clock, has a cup of coffee, and then logs on to his work at 9:30, and then finishes work at 5:30. And she's in school at 6:15 every morning, and she kind of thinks we earn the same salary. Why are we like this? It's about incentivization of getting people into the classroom. Why would you choose a lifestyle where you are constantly burnt out rather than having a kind of a cup of coffee at 8 o'clock in the morning? And I've always said that yes, pay fantastic, but actually what I'd really like as a head of FAC is to have one extra free every day. If I could have a free every day, then I'd actually be able to keep on top of my workload. I'd be able to do the thing that I actually love, which is shaping the next generation, and I'd feel like I'd be able to support my colleagues a little bit better as well. And that's about funding extra teachers in the system, isn't it, so that they can cover that cost as well. So I think like the Lib Dem policy is basically to create a kind of a national workforce strategy and create a workforce plan for getting people into the future, for the future, and retaining them, and making sure, making sure that the pay body is fully independent, because at the moment it has to be ratified by the government, and that's kind of not really serving much of a purpose, because if they want to turn it down, they're going to turn it down.
Thanks, Rob. Hannah?
I think none of us went into teaching for the money. We all do it for the kids, because we like, and I will do every minute of every day if it will benefit them in some way. Like, my heart will do anything I can to make their lives better and make them succeed. But the issue is it is not only teacher retention, but it's budget. My school have got 4 teachers leaving, whether a couple of moving, and we've got maternity leaves and stuff, but my school does not have the budget to replace them. We're actually filling all of those gaps in-house, as opposed to recruiting new people in, because of the deficit. There's 40% of schools are going to be under budget this year. I mean, sorry, not going to reach their budget this year. They're going to be well over it. So how are we going to, because not only are we not getting people into the schools are going to have cutting staff, and that's going to be more work that everyone else is going to have to do in order to fill those gaps to help the schools stay on budget. So it's this kind of snowball effect that I feel like is getting worse, and there needs to be some way of stopping it before it's going, like, it feels like we're at a real breaking point, that it's going to be worse in the last couple of years. How do we stop this?
So, super question, Hannah. And I mean, fair point, Rob. Time is often more valuable than money. So can the panel think, what's the one thing you would do to boost recruitment, to stem that kind of, brain drain, as Brent called it earlier? Christopher, what might you do?
Well, building on some of the ideas we've heard already, I think I haven't looked at the Lib Dems workforce plan in detail yet, but I'd be certainly interested to have a look at that and see what it contains. I certainly think we need to really give some considerable thought to what a teacher's career looks like, from entry point to exit point and then retirement and beyond. We need to move towards a system where a teacher can stay in the classroom but do a number of different things in addition to their schoolwork, with the balance being right. We've spoken in the past, haven't we, on the weekly review about some kind of sabbatical scheme that teachers might be able to take advantage of so that they can explore other interests outside the classroom that make them more enriching role models when they step back into the classroom later and work with our young children. We've talked about that. Pay is quite important. Obviously, we're all working professionals with bills to pay, but I think we need to really ask ourselves what we want teaching to be like as an ongoing narrative from the day you train and get your qualification to train and then teach in the classroom to leaving it and preparing the next generation of teachers. We need to look at a number of different roles that teachers can slot into within their own school, possibly working within other partner schools if that's something that the system can facilitate, but to make teaching a more enriching experience while they're in the profession.
Rob, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think really it's been alluded to before. We've really got to bump up the rhetoric about what kind of teachers actually are and start celebrating our teachers a little bit more in the country, so that we've got a little bit more respect from kind of from outside places. That comes from the way that we talk about teachers. That comes from the way that we talk about the education system. And when I say we, I mean our politicians. I mean the people who are running the country. We've really got to kind of sell that we are a great educational institution full of diversity that are trying to move the next generation forward. I think once you get that, I think one of the reasons that a lot of teachers are leaving is because there's a lack of respect from parents, lack of respect in the classroom. Lots of kids swearing, punching, kicking, that sort of stuff, and that's a really dangerous situation for us to put ourselves in as individuals. And I think that's only going to change when there is a whole scale look at a change in the rhetoric about how we perceive the people who are in the classroom like us.
Well, I know you've got to pop off, but thank you so much for joining us, Rob. It's been really lovely talking to you today, so thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for having me. Bye.
How do we change that narrative? Because it is the teacher bashing is a thing in the media. We're very much seen as we just have really long holidays, we work short hours, but unless you're in it, you don't know kind of what it is and how it feels. How do we kind of change that? Brent, did you want to speak?
I think Joe's been trying to speak a couple of times.
Oh, sorry, Joe. Sorry.
Cheers, Brendan. Thank you. I was just going to say it's so kind of ironic, isn't it, that we have to teach kind of British values with tolerance, respect, and individual liberty, and yet they're the things that we as teachers don't feel like we have. Is that not? I find that a great sort of irony, really. I think the kind of sabbatical idea, I've always felt that, Christopher, it's a brilliant idea. I can't see why we don't. I think that would really bake in a real bit of enthusiasm. If you knew you had that to look forward to, how you would use it, I think it'd be a real sort of precious moment. So I don't know, every 7 years or whatever else will be a brilliant idea or something like that. And it's a specialism as well, isn't it? If teachers aren't trained, so I teach kind of RSHE, which obviously is really important and needs specialism. If you don't have specialism in that, then it's pretty bad, really. Then and that's really, really important. Otherwise, if you don't have that wider understanding, which obviously teachers need, and if they're not well trained, especially teaching around kind of sex ed and stuff, then of course we're missing all that wider issues. And then of course that does support the school ethos and all the things that come into schools from outside that I guess I keep sort of referencing. And obviously when it talks about the extra teachers, I did mention the VAT on private schools, which I know has, I'm sure, been mentioned before, but that's really, really important, because how do we fund this? I know it's been fairly controversial. It's interesting that the Sunday Times has come out this morning to back Labour. I know the Telegraph seems like they're not going to, because they've really pushed on this as another culture war term that they've tried to sort of separate, when really, as we're trying to say here, and how much agreement there is about what needs to be done. But I think a forward-thinking policy plan, from government, but driven by teachers. So hopefully, when I win next Thursday, Friday, I will definitely be. And it is startling that we only have, I believe, a 14% representation in Parliament from public sector workers. I think we make up 35% of the economy. And I think that needs to be. We need more teachers, nurses in there who understand everyday life. Oh, go on.
I completely agree. I was going to swing it a little bit. I know that previously they've had things about talking about bonuses or higher amounts for people in core subjects coming in and we're trying to get in the maths teachers early on. Do we need to flip it? Because I talked about this on my show on Tuesday. Do we need to actually, if you're in the profession 10 years, you get a bonus then? If you make it 15, you get a bonus. As my mum made it to 73, so she got a nice bonus there. Do we actually need to retain teachers and actually show that we appreciate the longevity that people give their whole lives for this career, as opposed to trying to pay loads of money to get people in this kind of gap that we need filling, but then they leave after a few years?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, if you start create the financial incentives to come into teaching, what happens when the money's not there? You're right, Hannah, I haven't gone into teaching to be wealthy, but I've gone into teaching to, I don't expect not to have an uncomfortable life, but it's the equity. When I see private sector, getting better benefits and yet putting a lot less in, it's that thing that Rob was saying about, I work hard as a teacher, I do deserve the respect. And it comes back to that respect. Does my employer respect me? Do the kids respect me? Do the parents respect me? Does my educational secretary, does my government respect me? I have to say, I work hard to earn the respect of the children and the parents I teach, but I've invested in my school. I've invested in my community. And as a result of that, I've had generations of children who I produced, who I've taught, who've become teachers. And we don't have that any longer. People don't stay in schools long enough now because of the toxic environment of some schools. They don't invest in their communities. They walk out the door at 3:15. Teaching's always been very hard to define what actually a teacher is, because we just go above and beyond. It's in our nature. And I think we need to work with unions. I think unions are getting stronger because people are running towards the unions because of protection. They're scared. They're afraid. And we saw it again during COVID. And I think whoever comes in as a government is going to have to work very hard with the unions. And even to see the head teachers union thinking of going on strike, we're in trouble when the most moderate of teaching unions were actually saying enough is enough. So the teaching body, the good news is I think the teaching body has never been more united. I think it's never been more pushed. I think we are in a very stronger place than we have, because we are being threatened in a way that's had to force us to react. But I think that is going to last maybe a couple of months with the new Labour government, because it is going to be a new Labour government, Joe. I think the new Labour government's going to get a couple of months before the honeymoon period is over. And then I think we're back to where we were. And I would like Bridget Phillipson not to mirror Gillian Keegan. I think the Department of the Education needs to really think very carefully about how it's been treating the teaching profession. Again, the mandarins in charge, just the policy needs to be driven from what we need in schools, not the score points. I get worried when I have the Murdoch press backing the Labour Party. No disrespect, but it's really scary when you have the Murdoch press. And then when you see the news headlines, a lot of news headlines in schools are these culture wars nonsense. That's not the reality of what's going on in school. As a history teacher like yourself, Joe, I know I'm not teaching woke history, whatever that is. I'm teaching a broad and balanced curriculum. I'm teaching children to both sides of the British Empire. I'm an Irishman doing that. And I'm an Irishman who's a Green Party guy, and I'm doing that. So if I'm not one not doing that, who is doing all this culture war stuff? So we need to also represent what is actually good about schools and change the narrative. Those adverts they used to run on television
Brent, Point well made. And I want to just marry your points there. And you talked about teachers and the boundaries, and you talked about our altruism and so on. I can really, really identify with that. And I just want to marry that with Chris's point from earlier, which is about somebody having an overview of the profession and how we move through stages and so on. John, I want to come to you. Who could look after teachers in such a way that those 2 points could be married and could actually turn the profession into something that is esteemed, that is valued? John, have you any thoughts on that? And then I want to go to Joe, because I want to, we were told, way more than 14 years ago, education by one of his preliminaries. So John first.
Absolutely. We would do worse than having a look at the Finnish education system. I mean, I know it's always held up. The Finns do education really well and so on, but nonetheless, we would. And when we look at the way they treat teachers, that curious thing where it's harder to become a doctor in Finland than it is harder to become a teacher in Finland than it is to become a doctor and so on, that it's a highly esteemed profession. And one of the reasons is Chris is right. They have an idea about how you progress. You're not expected to simply, well, you're not expected to simply grind on through the profession. That's a characterization, but there is a degree of that in this country. Whereas if you develop education of teachers, teacher training, teacher development, teacher career development should be at the forefront of schools. I remember approaching one of my seniors many years ago and saying, I want to do a master's degree. And they said, fine, go and do it, but not, you won't get any time off. You won't get any assistance. You won't get any, just fit it round your career. Training, developing your own career, I think, is something schools. We used to have that silly thing they put on here, letterheadings called, investors in people, and it meant nothing other than a letterheading. We need to be truly investors in people, and that will help retention as well.
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I was just thinking then, I'm sure we all watch the government produce sort of adverts on TV, and they might appear at a cinema, and I sit there and try not to well up and thinking, oh, that's me, that's great. And so it's out there, but how much does it actually manifest itself in the support and the pathways is sadly really true. Obviously you can imagine as a candidate whilst teaching, if I've taken any time off, I take it unpaid. I meant some of the paraphernalia behind me, of which I apologise about my background. But I've had to organise the kind of school prom this week. I mean, how many candidates are working full time and trying to do that as well is just laughable. But that's again an example of it's difficult. I mean, I do think parents do respect teachers in lots of respect. I think Brent's right about how much that is within schools sometimes. So worried as they are about performing to those Ofsted to the league tables, I'm pretty sure, Brent, if to reassure you Labour-wise, I think so Bridget Phillipson has done lots of work on talking to schools and school leaders and school teachers, to be fair, and has done hundreds and hundreds of visits. And I'm really sure that they're going to very quickly move, as they are in lots of areas, to try and get things moving quicker. And that means from doctors' strikes on that area as well, just so we can settle in and get a bit more positivity running through the system as quick as we can, really.
Yeah, to start that point, I mean, I've spoken to Daniel Kebede personally as the head of the NEU, and I asked him the question personally: if the Labour government is not going to seriously take pay and conditions, will you be asking the NEU and other unions to go out on strike? And unequivocally, the answer is yes. If things do not change, the Labour Party is going to get a little bit of a bounce. But if things do not fundamentally start changing on the ground, as Hannah's point was, things are getting worse. They are getting progressively worse year on year, and I just don't know where the bottom's coming yet. And I don't think we can sustain this much longer, because people like myself who can keep this going after 20 years, even I'm having serious conversations about how long I can keep going. And I'm as resilient as you could probably get, but we're fighting a rearguard action. We need the cavalry to come now. We've been in the front line for a couple of years. We need the cavalry. So Bridget Phillipson better be blowing on that trumpet, and the cavalry better be coming, because if it's not, the problems are going to mount up even more. And if it's not sorted out more radically than I think the policies may say, and that's maybe the thing of not upsetting your Murdoch press. We're all holding our breath thinking the Labour Party that was currently getting is playing it safe. Is it going to be more radical in education? Is that the gamble that we can take? I don't know if I can take that gamble, and other people can take that gamble. And that's where we'll be in 6 months' time. But that's where, we'll probably be in 6 months' time still discussing the same issues. Like I say, some of our policies are 2015, like Ofsted abolishing it. We keep every year hearing the same thing. We got to change it. It has to be. Words like education and change use a lot, but genuine change is different between saying the word change. It's like the reform means reform. Does it really? It's just a word. It has to be actually followed through. Okay.
Can I just say really quickly on that? Sorry. Obviously, again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this will take time. The 6,500 teachers aren't going to spring out of the ground, are they, in 6 months? But I think it's about words and attitudes and showing that there is that dialogue. I think that's what Labour will do. Labour did it last time. I mean, I didn't kind of agree with everything Blair did on the Iraq war, whatever else. I marched against him. And I'm an NEU sort of rep as well. So I will definitely be pushing and fighting for that. But I think it's about conversations. It's about kind of collaboration. And it's about a kind of positivity that needs to be there, which I would say for 14 years has just been the absolutely opposite way. And as I say to people all the time, give me one kind of achievement the Conservatives have done in the last 14 years, and the only one I ever give them is same-sex marriage, of which it kind of relied on Labour MPs to put through. So there has been nothing. I don't think they've done anything. They've drained, and fine for Bridget to have a 12-month sort of honeymoon, but I fear it will take a lot longer. But I think we can start that process sooner, and hopefully I'll be there to argue all of our cases, guys.
We've just had a comment by JBL. There is at least one teacher in every school who's forgotten more about education than any Secretary of State will ever know. Yet there seems to be no way to get through to these people. They rely on academics who rarely venture into classrooms. And I think that's kind of been a bit of a theme tonight, that we want more teacher voices heard. And that's kind of the whole point of Teacher Talk Radio and what we pride ourselves on, that we want more teachers, I think, to feel heard, to feel like there is like this solution, because at the moment it seems to be that everything keeps getting added into the teachers list of things that we require to do, but there isn't anything being taken out or any finances added in to be able to support us in doing that. So it's quite an interesting point. But is there one thing that you'd really like to see changed moving forward? What do you think your biggest thing, or the first thing that you would want to do moving
Hannah, could I combine that with one other thing? I don't know if you can see that, it's hard to see, but the government is due for a 3 billion windfall. So what would you spend your 3 billion windfall? And combine that with Hannah's question, what change? And you've got 3 billion to spend. Who are we going to, Hannah?
Joe, you go first.
Sorry, I'll go first, and I'll definitely kind of shut up after that. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's about teachers, isn't it? It's about having the well-paid kind of support staff in there as well for SEND and all the other things. I'd love to see, every school, rather than have a hub for dealing with autism, I'd like every school to have those components to it. I'd love a lot more space, and as Rob rightly had said earlier, to give that freedom, which again, I believe PPA's time was something which Labour kind of embedded in. So I just think time and specialism.
Time's against us. Thank you.
Time and specialism, sorry.
John?
Look, we're going to put
sorry, Brent. One policy: if not feed children, which I'd end where Chris brought us in with free school meals, then bring back Sure Start. Sure Start was great. It worked well. It was going well. It was a crime that it was abolished. Bring back Sure Start.
Yeah. Could I say we would invest 5 billion in special needs and SEND provision in mainstream schools? It means all schools have fully accessible buildings, specially trained teachers, and local councils have fund properly to SEND support. I think that's the horriblest thing in the moment. We're just not meeting the most vulnerable children's needs, and it's causing us so much distress. We just can't get that help to those children, those most vulnerable children. So I would start with the most vulnerable, and that is our SEND provision, which we really need to sort out. I think it's a national disgrace, that one.
Fab. Thank you.
Yeah, I would kind of have a look at this curriculum that is really focused on the future, technology, AI, really driving that forward into the future to support, and this is the economic output of this, it supports the UK PLC going forward as a country. We've got some big issues currently that we've not mentioned on this because they're not educational, but we need to solve, some of these kind of environmental changes, these crisis in environment that we've got at the minute. That is going to come from critical thinking, technology, integrated, and it's the students that are going to lead that as they leave our education system.
I think we've got just time for one very, very quick question, and I'm going to hold you all to one sentence. I think everybody's a teacher. We know what one sentence is. Everybody on the panel this morning has been really well-mannered, really polite. We haven't talked over each other or anything like that. But if you watch the hustings, politicians talk over each other. They call each other names. They point aggressively at each other. There's all sorts of rowdiness that goes on. If the politicians were an unruly class like that, what is the one thing as a teacher you would do to bring discipline to that group? One sentence, Adam?
Well, I think kind of detention for all of them at the minute.
Gotcha. Hannah?
I'd put them into art class so they can get rid of all their anxiety and their angst that's causing and coming out in the scenario.
That's so creative. Christopher?
I'd point to the big ethos about why we're here and why we learn.
Okay. John?
I wouldn't change it. I like it. It's entertainment, and a bit of indiscipline is much better than those societies where there is lots of discipline. Russia, North Korea,
Gotcha.
such like.
Joe?
Maybe they could pass around like a talking stick or something and only speak when it's in their hands. Or maybe a red rose, eh?
The conch, oh, red rose, cheeky one, slipping that in at the end. Brent?
Oh, I'd institute slant in the Houses of Parliament, make sure they all have a pen. I'd institute silent corridors in the Houses of Parliament. I'd have them all in rows in the Houses of Parliament. And I'd basically been Catherine Burble singing, bring in the Houses of Parliament. Bring back the cane, maybe. You know what I mean?
It's one sentence.
It never did me any harm. I'm joking.
Controversial
No,
content.
I'm joking. No, don't.
I know.
I'm joking. That's complete.
I know
opposite.
you are.
I'm joking. No, I think respect. I can say just good manners and respect. Tell their mothers.
Yeah.
Tell their
Look,
parents on them.
I'd like to thank you all. I'm just going to hand over to Hannah and then to Chris to close.
Just a thank you to all our guests. We've had a lovely show, and it's absolutely flown by. If you've joined in later on and have missed any of it, then you will be able to watch this back. And a big thank you to our sponsors as well, John Cat, Teaching How-Tos, Apps for Good, and Reading Solutions UK. And I'll leave this last word to Christopher, whose brainchild this was.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all very much for listening, and thank you very much to all our guests for taking part today. We had originally dreamed up this show as a means of inventing our own Teachers Talk Radio manifesto. I'm not quite sure how we've got any closer to doing that this morning, but we've certainly had some very lively and entertaining discussion indeed, and some very informative talking about particular policies in particular areas. Those big 4 areas of education that we set up the show around really make a difference to the children we teach, the young adults those children become, and to all of our colleagues who are busily engaged in getting the best out of those people that sit in front of them. So thank you very much indeed for your contributions this morning. Thank you very much too to the texted messages we've had sent to us in the course of the show. Paul's certainly enjoyed the show and seems that he thinks today's talking and ideas have enabled him to make up his mind about which way to vote. So we wish you all the best of luck in your respective constituency elections. We hope if you get back into Parliament or get into Parliament that you'll be back here on Teachers Talk Radio to tell us how it's all going. And I think you've possibly taken on the only profession that requires more 24-hour, 7-day-a-week switched onness than teaching. So good luck to you all, and thank you for your contributions today.
Thank you.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Cat Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncatbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Outstanding and world-class vision, world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused